A tomb built for a queen, sealed for 2,000 years. Inside, the bones of a child she never had. When scientists finally opened the seal, the truth inside was nothing anyone expected. Her real grave has never been found. Alexandria's palace rose from limestone and salt air, ruled by the Ptolemies for 2 centuries. Marriage between brother and sister was not scandal here. It was law, introduced generations earlier and never abandoned. 2 crowns, 1 altar, 1 bloodline folding in on itself, waiting on thrones built for exactly that. A king married his bride 1 week and killed her the next, certain the crown excused him. The mob that had once adored him tore him apart in the street days later. His signet ring was found broken, proof that here, murder was simply how succession worked, generation after generation. Into this family, a girl was born and given an education built for a future ruler. Greek rhetoric, the library's endless scrolls, languages no other Ptolemy bothered to learn. Outside the palace, the Nile rose and fell as it always had, indifferent. Her father, meanwhile, was already drowning in debt to Rome, a debt that would soon cost the family its throne. When Alexandria turned on her father, he fled into exile, and her sister Berenice simply took the throne he left empty. Roman mercenaries, paid with a fortune in silver, brought him back 2 years later. Within days, Berenice was executed on her own father's order. Cleopatra was barely a teenager, and already she understood the rule of this family. Lose the throne, lose your life. Her father's will named her and her 11-year-old brother joint heirs, co-rulers by law, husband and wife as well. Officials read the document aloud to a silent court, while attendants dressed the boy in regalia he barely understood. Within weeks, 2 thrones that had stood empty were occupied again, by 2 children, technically married. Cleopatra watched from the edge of the court, calm, calculating, already aware that the crown on her brother's head was held there by someone else's hand. The eunuch Pothinus controlled the boy completely, speaking through him to the assembled officials. And on a table nearby, a scroll lay half-read, its seal already broken, its message not yet acted on. Within months, official documents began listing only one name, hers. Scribes hesitated over which name belonged beside it. She addressed the court directly, her brother conspicuously absent from the throne beside her. At a temple upriver, masons carved her titles into stone, alone, as if he had never ruled at all. Pothinus and his allies began meeting in shadowed rooms, sensing the balance shifting away from the boy they controlled. Her face was already on minted coins, circulating from hand to hand across the city. Her brother watched from doorways, unseen, unheard. One shadow on the wall had grown larger than the other. Whose throne, really, was this becoming? The Nile kept rising and falling, indifferent to thrones. The 2 crowns from the shrine no longer touched, set apart as if the marriage itself had quietly ended. At a window above the harbor, she made her choice, alone. What does it do to a person, growing up in a family where a brother kills a sister, and a father kills his own daughter? Pothinus moved first. Guards barred the palace gates against her, and Cleopatra, the queen by her father's own will, found herself locked out of her own capital. She didn't plead. She rode for the eastern frontier, to Pelousion, and began building an army of her own from soldiers willing to bet on a woman. At a campfire on the frontier, she addressed soldiers who had never sworn loyalty to a woman before. She paid them, recruited them, armed them with whatever the treasury could spare. Within weeks, a real camp stood where there had been only sand. Somewhere, on a wax tablet, someone was already counting the days of her exile. Meanwhile, a defeated Roman general named Pompey sailed toward this same coast, looking for refuge from his rival Caesar. Ptolemy's advisors saw an opportunity instead of a guest, and weighed his life against the favor of whoever would win. They smiled as he stepped onto the shore. Beneath one man's cloak, a blade was already waiting. Pompey was killed on the beach, his head sent to Caesar as a gift, a way to win favor with the coming victor. It didn't work. Caesar looked at the gift with disgust, not gratitude, and ordered his old rival buried with proper honors, alone, on a quiet stretch of shore, far from the city that had killed him. Caesar tried to broker peace, offering the two youngest royal children a kingdom of their own on Cyprus, a tidy solution that would remove them from the contest for Egypt's throne. One of them refused to disappear quietly into that arrangement. At night, Arsinoe slipped out of the palace with a single loyal servant, choosing a besieged city over a quiet island. She declared herself queen before her own soldiers, and they knelt, swearing to a girl barely out of her teens what they had refused her own brother. Her ally Ganymedes moved quickly to eliminate any rival commander standing in her way. Within days, Alexandria itself was barricaded, a city at war with its own family. On the street, no one could tell anymore whose side a fallen badge belonged to. Caesar's reinforcements finally landed, and Ptolemy's forces broke within hours, scattering toward the river. The 13-year-old king ran for the riverbank, scrambling into an already overloaded boat as soldiers pushed it from the shore in panic. It capsized almost immediately, dragged down by the weight of his own armor. They searched the riverbank until dusk and found only a single gilded sandal in the mud. No body, no crown. Ptolemy XIII was 13 years old when the Nile took him, the first of Cleopatra's siblings to die for this throne, but not the last. Even Caesar's own account barely mentions how. Cleopatra received the news without visible grief, and within weeks placed her remaining brother, 12 years old now, on the throne beside her, in name only. A throne, it turns out, rarely stays empty for long. Someone always sits down in it, and somebody else always decides who that will be. In Rome, Arsinoe was marched through the streets in chains, forced to walk behind a burning model of the very lighthouse she had once defended with her own soldiers. The crowd that came to mock her found themselves instead quietly impressed by a teenager who refused to break. Custom demanded she be strangled once the triumph ended, as it had been done to captives before her for generations. Caesar spared her instead. Not mercy exactly, more a calculation about Roman opinion. She was sent into exile at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, one of the wonders of the world, and told to disappear quietly into its shadow. 4 years later, Caesar was dead, stabbed by his own senators in the middle of Rome's Senate House. Half a world away, in a quiet nursery in Alexandria, none of that noise had reached yet. It would, within days, carried across the sea by a single, exhausted messenger. Within months, Ptolemy XIV, Cleopatra's last living brother, sickened and died, with no warning anyone thought worth recording. No ancient source claims to know exactly how. Most simply assumed poison, and assumed her hand behind it. By then, her infant son already sat on the throne where her brother's name had just been carved away. She arrived at Tarsus on a gilded barge built to be seen, and it worked exactly as intended. Roman officers stood speechless on the dock. What followed wasn't romance so much as theater. Opulence as a weapon, deployed against a man whose army she needed on her side more than his affection. She talked her way out of suspicion, convinced Antony she'd never aided Caesar's killers. But somewhere in that same conversation, her sister's name came up. Still alive, still in Ephesus, still, in Cleopatra's eyes, a loose thread. A sealed letter went out within days, carried by a courier who had no idea what it would cost. In Ephesus, Arsinoe had no idea any of this was happening, an entire sea away from the court that had just decided her fate. She was simply living, arranging her few belongings, unaware that armed men had just arrived at the temple gate. The priest who'd once welcomed her as queen hesitated at the door, sensing exactly what they'd come for. They led her out onto the temple steps in broad daylight, and she walked there on her own feet, refusing to be dragged like a criminal. What happened next, no historian dwells on for long. Afterward, only the priest remained, kneeling alone on the marble, in a silence he had no part in choosing. It was, by Roman standards, a sacrilege, a killing inside a sanctuary, on consecrated ground no soldier was supposed to touch. The only person punished for it was the priest who had greeted her, and he was pardoned only after Ephesus itself begged Cleopatra directly to spare him. 3 siblings were gone now. 1 throne remained, entirely hers. The Nile didn't care, and neither did history, much, for a long time afterward. But somewhere, in a quiet room lit by 1 lamp, someone was about to notice something no one had thought to ask in 2,000 years. The tomb from the beginning? In 2025, scientists finally opened it. The bones inside belonged to a boy, never to a queen. Her real grave has never been found.